You're about to hear 6 stories about the strangest, most unsettling things that can happen when you're the only one awake. Every one of these is a work of fiction, written for this channel, but if you've ever worked a night shift, you already know. Some of this stuff doesn't feel far off. By the last one, you're going to wish you'd stopped after the third. Let's get into it. Story 1: The radio. Dana had worked the overnight desk at a small regional hospital for almost 3 years, and by now she'd gotten used to the strange rhythm of the place after midnight. The quiet hallways, the hum of vending machines, the specific, particular silence of a building full of sleeping people who don't know you're the only one really awake in it. What she never got used to, even after 3 years, was the radio. It sat on the corner of the nurse's station, an old handheld unit used for basic building communication between the front desk, security, and the on-call supervisor's office 2 floors. It had worked fine for years, mostly silent except for the occasional routine check-in. A battered piece of equipment nobody thought twice about. Around 1:40 that night, the radio clicked. Not static, not the little chirp it made during a normal transmission. A single deliberate click, like someone pressing the talk button and changing their mind. Before speaking, Dana glanced at it, waited, went back to her paperwork. Radios click sometimes. It clicked again 10 minutes later. Then twice in quick succession, close enough together that it sounded like a question, and then an answer to itself. By 2, she'd stopped pretending to work. That was the first thing. Here's the second. At 2:15, the hallway camera feed on her monitor, the one covering the stretch of corridor just outside the ward, froze for exactly 4 seconds. Not glitched, not pixelated. Frozen clean like a photograph on a frame that showed the hallway completely empty. When it unfroze, the timestamp had skipped ahead by 4 minutes it never actually recorded. She told herself it was a server hiccup. She'd seen it happen before, just not paired with a radio that wouldn't stop clicking. Then came the third thing, and the third thing was the voice. It wasn't loud and it wasn't clear. Calm, low, speaking slowly enough that individual words were almost, but not quite, possible to make out. The rhythm of an actual sentence, spoken by someone who fully expected to be heard and answered on a channel that, as far as Dana knew, only 3 handsets in the entire building could even access. She picked up her own handset and said hello. The voice didn't respond directly. It just kept going at the exact same low, even pace, as if her transmission hadn't come through at all, or as if it didn't matter whether anyone answered. She tried security. No response. She tried again, letting the silence stretch too long after releasing the button, listening for anything at all in the space where a reply should have been. The strange voice was still there underneath her own open channel. 2 conversations, 1 frequency. One of them clearly not meant for her. She got up, told herself it was just to stretch her legs. Walked faster than usual down to the ground floor, the radio still clipped to her hip, still clicking. The guard's office door was ajar. Inside, the night guard was fast asleep, feet up, chin down, completely out. His own radio sat powered off on the desk beside him, battery compartment popped open, the battery itself sitting a few inches away, as though it had been removed rather than simply died. He startled awake when she said his name, insisting he hadn't touched his radio all night, that it had been on the whole shift, right up until whatever moment he'd apparently gone under. He couldn't explain the battery. He couldn't explain how long he'd actually been out, either, once they checked the access logs. At least an hour. Maybe closer to 90 minutes. The exact window during which Dana had been hearing a voice on a channel his radio powered. Off, battery removed, could not have been transmitting on. They checked the third handset together. Locked in a drawer 2 floors up, in an office neither of them had visited that night. Exactly where it should have been. Powered off. Fully charged. Undisturbed. 3 handsets. 1 channel. 2 of them provably silent for the entire window in question, and Dana's own picking up a voice that had no working equipment left anywhere in the building that could have been sending. And here's the part Dana doesn't tell people, not even the ones who ask. Before she went back upstairs that night, she rewound the hallway camera footage to the 4 seconds it had frozen. It was still frozen on her screen when she'd left the desk. It wasn't frozen anymore. In the 4 seconds she was gone, the empty hallway in the frame now showed a door standing. Open. A door that, on every other camera in the building, that night and every night since, has never once been photographed open. Dana still works the same desk. The radio still sits in the same spot. She keeps the volume down now, low enough to catch a real emergency, but not quite low enough. She's told herself more than once to make out actual words. She has never gone back and looked at what that door leads to. She tells herself that's a daytime problem for someone else's shift. Story 2, Pump 6. Marcus worked graveyard shift at a gas station just off a mostly empty stretch of highway. The kind of job where most nights meant maybe a dozen customers between midnight and 6, and long stretches of nothing but fluorescent light and a stocked cigarette rack to keep him company. The station had 8 pumps, and Pump 6 had a habit of triggering its in-use indicator on the register display, even when nobody was standing there. Maintenance had checked it twice, found nothing wrong, and everyone eventually accepted it as a harmless quirk of an aging pump. That was the story Marcus told himself, right up until the night it stopped being harmless. The first sign was small. A little after 2, the indicator lit up as usual, empty as usual, except this time the number on the readout was already climbing when he looked, ticking upward from a dollar amount that hadn't been 0 to begin with. As if a transaction that started before his shift had never actually finished. He reset it from the register. It reset clean. He almost forgot about it. The second sign came an hour later. A car pulled up to Pump 6. Headlights off, engine running, nobody visible inside from his angle at the register. He watched the handle lift on its own, the readout climbing again, exactly like a normal fill up, except no card had been inserted and the payment screen stayed dark. Marcus stepped outside to ask if everything was okay, and the second he crossed the threshold of the door, the pump shut off. Numbers frozen. Engine still running. Driver's seat, when he got close enough to actually see, empty. He backed away from the car without turning around, which is a thing he still can't explain. Except that some part of him didn't want to know what would be standing behind him if he did. He called it in. Waited for backup. By the time a coworker arrived 20 minutes later, the car was gone. Nobody had seen it leave. The footage from that exact camera angle was corrupted for exactly those 23 minutes. And fine before and after. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 3 nights later, alone again, Marcus found an old faded gas receipt tucked under his windshield wiper when he walked out to his own car at the end of shift. Pump 6. Timestamp for a fill-up that happened that same night, at a time he'd been standing at the register the entire shift and sworn nobody had used that pump. The amount on the receipt, $11.40. The exact number the ghost transaction had frozen on 3 nights earlier. Marcus still works there. Pump 6 still glitches sometimes. He doesn't go outside to check anymore, and he stopped parking his own car anywhere near it. Just in case whatever's running that tab ever decides to settle it. Story 3, Room 214. Priya worked the front desk of a mid-range hotel near an airport, mostly handling late check-ins from delayed flights and the occasional overnight walk-in. Most nights were unremarkable. She still remembers room 214 clearly, years later, in more detail than she's comfortable with. It was a normal enough booking. A single guest one night checked in around 11 and asked, politely but specifically, not to be disturbed under any circumstances until checkout. Around 1 in the morning, the phone at the front desk rang. Internal line. Room 214. Priya picked up, said hello, and heard nothing but breathing, slow and steady, for almost 30 seconds before the line disconnected. She called back. No answer. Called again a few minutes later. Still nothing. That was the first thing. She almost let it go there. At 1:45, the lobby's overhead speaker, the one that only ever plays elevator music, cut to dead silence for exactly the length of one breath in and out before the music resumed. Exactly where it had left off. She checked the system logs later. Nothing had touched that speaker all night. Hotel policy in cases like the phone call was to send someone up quietly, without assuming the worst, just to confirm the guest was fine. Priya went up herself, knocked softly, and when there was no response, used the master key to open the door just enough to look inside without fully entering. The room was empty. Bed made. Guest's bag by the door exactly as it would be left by someone stepping out briefly. Television off. Bathroom door open and dark. No guest. She almost closed the door right there. She didn't because of the smell. Faint and specific and wrong for an empty room that had been locked all night. The smell of a struck match gone out somewhere close enough that she instinctively checked the carpet for a burn mark she never found. She checked the parking lot footage the next morning, expecting to see the guest come and go at some point overnight. The footage showed him entering at check-in and leaving the next morning at checkout. Between those two timestamps, according to every camera covering every hallway and exit in the building, he never left that room once. Priya pulled the guest's registration out of simple curiosity months later after she couldn't stop thinking about it. The ID he'd checked in with didn't match any record the county had on file for a person by that name, that birth date at all. As far as any system outside that hotel's front desk was concerned, the man in room 214 had never existed before that night and has never existed since. Priya still doesn't have an explanation for the phone call, the smell, or where he was when she looked inside. She knows that whenever a guest asks specifically not to be disturbed, she makes sure someone else covers the follow-up checks. She has never told anyone the real reason why. Story 4: The Handoff. Devon worked security at a small regional warehouse, a job that mostly consisted of walking a fixed route through the building every hour, checking doors, checking cameras, and logging anything unusual, which most nights was nothing at all. Part of the job was a shift handoff log, a notebook where the outgoing guard left brief notes for whoever covered next. Routine stuff mostly. Dog door sticking. Motion light out in aisle 9. One night, Devon arrived and found the previous guard's note unusually long. Several paragraphs describing footsteps on the second-floor mezzanine, a section fully closed off and empty of inventory for over a year. The note said the footsteps had continued on and off for most of the shift from an area with no possible access except through a locked door the guard swore he'd personally checked. Devon assumed nerves or a coworker messing with him. That lasted until close to midnight. He heard it too. Slow, steady footsteps directly above the aisle he was standing in on a mezzanine level that, when he checked the door himself, was still locked exactly as described. He called it in. A supervisor came out. They checked the mezzanine together with a spare key and found it completely empty, dust undisturbed in a way that suggested no one had walked across it in a very long time. That was the first strange thing that night. It wasn't the last. Back downstairs, doing the rest of his walkthrough, Devon noticed the handoff notebook itself had moved from the front desk where he'd left it to the bottom shelf of a rack 2 aisles. Over a shelf he was certain he hadn't touched, in a part of the warehouse the footsteps upstairs had no way of reaching. He opened it. Underneath his own most recent entry, in handwriting that wasn't his and wasn't the previous guard, someone had written 3 words, "They're not gone." He asked the previous guard about it the next day. The previous guard swore he'd never written anything past his own signed note and got quiet. Genuinely quiet when Devon described the handwriting. Devon still works there. He still writes an unusually detailed handoff note himself now, every single night in case whoever comes in after him needs to know what to listen for. He has started checking the notebook twice before he leaves, once at the start of his walkthrough and once right before he clocks out, just to be sure nothing's been added between. Story 5: The Last Table. Renee worked as the sole overnight server at a 24-hour diner just off a state highway exit, the kind of place that stayed open mostly out of habit and the occasional trucker passing through in the small hours. Around 4 in the morning, business about as dead as it ever got, an older man came in alone. Sat at a corner booth and ordered coffee, black, nothing else. He didn't say much. Mostly stared out the window at the empty parking lot. Renee, used to quiet regulars, checked on him periodically the way she would with anyone. The second time she walked past, she noticed his coffee cup hadn't moved. Not an inch. Not a fingerprint in the condensation on the table beside it. The third time she walked past, the booth was empty. Cup still half full, still faintly warm, but the man was gone. No sign of him at the register, the restroom, or anywhere in the small dining room she could see clearly from where she stood. She checked the door. The bell above it, which chimed audibly every single time it opened, hadn't rung. She would have heard it. She always heard it. Renee mentioned it to the diner's longtime cook the next morning, half joking, expecting to be teased. Instead, he went quiet and told her that Booth had a bit of a reputation among the staff who'd worked there long enough. A regular, unexplained sighting predating Renee's own time there by at least a decade. Always the same details. Older man, black coffee, gone without the bell ever ringing. She asked him, half serious, if anyone had ever tried talking to the man before he vanished. The cook stopped smiling. Told her one server had, years back, said something to him instead of just refilling his cup. Asked if he was doing okay. He answered her. Nobody else was in the diner to hear what he said, and she never repeated it to another living person. She quit 2 weeks later and never came back for her last paycheck. Renee still works the overnight shift. She still serves that booth when someone sits there. She keeps the refills quick and the conversation shorter, and no matter how long the silence stretches, she has promised herself she will never, ever ask him anything back. Story 6, the sign-in sheet. Tomas worked the overnight front desk at a small apartment building downtown, a job that mostly involved buzzing in the occasional late resident and keeping an eye on a lobby that was, most nights, completely empty after midnight. Part of the job was a sign-in sheet for visitors, a simple clipboard by the door. Residents were supposed to call down and let Tomas know a guest was coming, and the guest would sign in on the way up. One night, around 1 a.m, the clipboard's pens started moving. Tomas glanced up from his phone at the sound, a soft, steady scratching, and watched for several full seconds before his brain caught up with what he was seeing, the pen writing a name. On the sign-in sheet by itself, resting in midair, no hand visible around it at all. The name it wrote wasn't a name. It was an apartment number, 3B. In handwriting that matched no resident's signature on file for that unit or any other. He called up to 3B on the intercom. No answer. Tried again. Still nothing. Building records showed 3B as vacant, had been for months, awaiting a tenant whose move-in date was still weeks away. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't, because 10 minutes later, the elevator activated on its own, without anyone pressing the call button, and rose floor by floor, stopping exactly on 3. Tomas watched the number on the display the entire time. Nobody got on. Nobody got off. Half a minute later, the doors closed themselves, and the elevator returned to the lobby. Empty, exactly where it started. He wrote a note in the building's log for the day manager, describing exactly what happened, and asked that maintenance take a look at 3B during regular daytime hours, when he wouldn't have to be the one opening that door. The day manager found nothing unusual in the apartment. Empty, clean, exactly as it should be for a vacant unit, except for one thing nobody could explain: a single fresh handprint at adult height pressed into the dust on the inside of the door. Fingers pointed outward toward the hallway, toward the lobby, toward the desk where Tomas was sitting when he read the report. The clipboard pen, as far as anyone can tell, still works completely normally. Tomas has never seen it move again. He has also never, not once since that night, been able to make himself look directly at the elevator doors when they open on their own between calls, which, the day manager assures him, is completely normal for an old building. It happens most nights now. If you made it through all 6 of these without turning on another light in the room, you're doing better than most people who work the night shift for a living. If you want to know what Devon found written in that notebook 2 nights later, that's a different video. Subscribe so you don't miss it. That's it for this one. If you liked it, you know what to do.